Welcome to another edition of Loyalty360's Thought Leadership and Loyalty Series. Today we're here with several team members from Aimia, a data-driven marketing and loyalty analytics company. So thank you so much for being here. We'd like to start with you, Pari. What would you say is the biggest challenge that your clients face today in creating measurable experiences to drive customer loyalty?
The answer is in the question itself. There is this perception amongst marketers that experience sits on one side of the spectrum versus customer data and analytics sits on the other side. So at this point, the perception amongst marketers is that experience is something which is intangible, and hence it is considered to be unquantifiable or not measurable. And what then happens is that it becomes something that is it's something that they know that they have to do, but they don't really know what it's really doing for them. And this is also translated in the way historically organizations have been structured, which is what we are seeing. You have the analytics and the campaigns team, which sit closely together and collaborate quite a bit, and either or both of them could sit potentially under the loyalty team, versus you have the experience as a KPI probably lying under the marketing team. And these two teams don't talk much historically. So that is one of the biggest challenges in actually measuring experiences.
And Tim, we'd like to pose the same question to you. What is the biggest challenge that your clients face today in creating measurable experiences to drive customer loyalty? And how do you recommend they measure efficacy?
It's a good question. So there's probably a couple parts to that. I mean, taking a step backwards, I think in general, measuring customer loyalty is pretty big challenge for the industry. So I know a lot of our clients over here in the UK are currently facing quite big challenges around how clean and accurate their data is. You've seen a lot of organizations in the past few decades making giant leaps forward in terms of getting the right systems and processes in place and getting their analytics up to speed. And I think because there was a big wave or rise of that over the past few decades, what you now see is that as organizations have kind of put all the pieces of the jigsaw pieces in place bit by bit, there are a lot of different systems and data points that aren't exactly talking to each other in the right way. And particularly from a European standpoint, we've got the global data protection regulation coming up in May next year, which means that a lot of organizations need to look very carefully at their data and actually make sure that they've got accurate, particularly customer information in their systems. And that's pretty important, because a lot of what we do when we're trying to measure loyalty programs is really look at that customer data to understand what it's actually telling them about their business, and I guess how to design and also how to measure the return on investment they're actually getting from existing loyalty programs or from any program that they would put in place. So I think one of the biggest challenges for organizations, particularly in the UK, probably across Europe, is actually just getting their systems and processes up to speed, so that you've got that single customer view. You don't want in an organization to have about 5 different views of the same customer, because it really stops you being able to actually measure anything relatively accurately. I think the secondary point for those organizations that are in quite a good place and they are trying to I guess think about how they measure things. It's all about what they're actually trying to understand and aim for with their loyalty program. So I think where you see organizations that have a really clear strategy around what they're trying to achieve with their loyalty program, that's great, and they can be quite targeted. I think what you see in a lot of organizations, and we see this within a lot of the retailers, is there can be quite different end objectives that come from different areas of the organization. So to give you an example, you've got some of the big retailers over here who the majority of them will at some point in the year implement a quite big discounts on wine. So they'll offer 25% off if you buy six bottles of wine. Now that's designed usually with a couple of ends in mind. You have the buyers in the organization who are really just trying to drive short-term gains, and you've got the broader marketing people who are trying to actually understand whether offering that kind of deal actually share from other supermarkets. So there's kind of competing objectives, and that can also, I guess, impact how you decide to measure that. If you were just to look at the uplift that week in terms of overall red wine sales, for instance, that would be one way of looking at it, albeit short term. But through other lenses, you could look at it over the next few months and see whether that's actually brought spend forward, that they would have just spent elsewhere at a different time. Or you could take a much longer term view and say, does that sort of promotion with a retailer actually make a customer over, the next two years a little bit more loyal or feel a little bit more brand warmth towards that supermarket? So I guess being really clear on what the supermarket or the company is trying to achieve helps us actually determine the right way of measuring it. I mean, as Aimia, we try and take quite a data-led approach to that, but there are times when you're going to need to combine that both from a quant and qual perspective. But it really does come down to what you're actually trying to achieve.
And Pari, can you follow up with that as well? How do you recommend they measure efficacy?
So when, as consultants, Aimia is called in to advise upon anyone who is willing to embark on measurable experiences as a journey, the first thing we recommend is actually a very quick 3-step framework, which Aimia has designed. And it's a very simple process. The first step is actually called a relevant segment. It comes down to the genesis that customer experiences or customer journeys are as unique as the customer themselves. So the beginning point of experience design should actually be a segmentation exercise, an intelligent segmentation that is done with the right kind of data. So if you have profile, demographic, behavioral, attitudinal, and recently social and locational data, you can actually identify your segments and really understand how they are unique in their needs and preferences, in their priorities and behavior. So that is a great starting point to actually curate experiences that are relevant to each of these segments. The next step that leads on from the segmentation is actually called relevant touchpoint. And that is where a customer journey mapping exercise comes front and center. So what we then recommend is use the customer journey mapping exercise, which is quite scientific, it's measurable, it's exhaustive, and to be able to identify the touch points that are most critical for a particular segment. So to be able to go through the decision-making process and to be able to identify which interaction points deserve the best marketing effort. And which then leads on to the third step, which I feel is the most critical, and that is the point which is called the right value exchange. So you have, at that point, marketers deciding how much value they're willing to invest in a particular touch point. So quantifying that value and also quantifying what is the exchange or the return in terms of value that anticipate out of that effort. So that measuring, creating quantifiable value for the touch point becomes critical in measuring the experience itself. So anyone who is willing to go through these 3 steps, I think it's a great point to start.
And next, Ivor, how sophisticated would you say the customer experience and customer loyalty initiatives of most brands are today?
I guess I think that there's probably two sides of it from the view of from the customer experience point of view. I think everyone's talking about being digital and having things through mobile apps and what have you and everything. And I think a lot of brands are actually doing that, but I think it still goes away from the fact that your program and your product needs to be seamless. So even if you have digital and you have mobile apps and everything, you might still have to have 2 separate apps. So that doesn't make it a seamless kind of process from the customer point of view. So I think from the other side is really just with legacy systems that companies have, and they have to work through what they have in terms of the infrastructure there, and adding in something new like loyalty just makes it a bit of a challenge for them. So I think from a customer experience point of view, yes, making it digital, but trying to make it joined up and seamless with your existing product offering as well. But I think that's the biggest challenge.
As well as the kind of measurement that they're doing on their experiences are tied back to the loyalty data. So there's quite a bit of exciting stuff that is happening and the market is quickly catching on to it.
And what is the single most important thing that you have done or do over a period of engagement, say a year maybe, that helps clients increase customer loyalty?
I think it's really just making sure it's not one size fits all for all the customers. Each customer has different needs. Each customer has different customer journeys that you need to map out. So it's really just making sure that what customer A receives is relevant to them. We talked about the clutter that's there before, so making sure that everything that they receive is relevant to them, not I guess it serves the customer better and serves the brand more. I think the worst thing is when customers just see that the brands are trying to sell them more and more things that might not be relevant to them. So I think just mapping out those journeys, providing messages that are relevant to those customers at that particular point in time, be it education about the program or be it something that allows them to gain more value from the product and the program.
And Pari, how would you respond to that same question?
I think if there was one thing that we would urge the marketers to do as a part of their annual marketing design would be the test and learn campaign itself. So test and learn campaign calendar is very critical for a marketer. And why so? Because it comes back to the kind of justification that you need for a specific loyalty treatment or a mechanic. And as we discussed about the limited loyalty budget, it then comes down to really identifying treatments that has the best efficacy for the right segment and for the right channel. So when you look at a test and learn campaign designed well, it can actually answer this question in identifying what is the right treatment for the right segment in the right channel. So one thing that marketers should definitely do is look at creating a test and learn campaign calendar and then overlaying it on their overall marketing calendar to identify periods of silence or periods where there are not any other promotional or seasonal activity happening, to then use the test and learn campaign to test a particular mechanic or a treatment. So that would really build confidence amongst marketers, their internal stakeholders in terms of efficacy, and also to create real value for the customers.
And Tim, back to you. What is the single most important thing that you have done over a period of engagement that helps clients increase customer loyalty?
Ultimately, I think it comes back to understanding the customer journey and what the customer behavior is. I mean, a lot of organizations now are hugely rich in the amount of data they actually have on their customers. They may not always have connected their systems in the right kind of way to actually get that information out or extract that information. But most organizations can get there either directly through their own data or through other forms, whether it's market research or actually working with the partners that they have. And I think by connecting that up and actually leveraging some of the analytics, you get that picture of how their customers behave really end to end. And again, it comes back to all the different touch points that you've got with that customer, thinking where aren't you engaging that customer as well, where you could be in future, whether it's through leveraging technology or whatever means. So by understanding that behavior, I think that there is a huge amount of you can do to also understand what your organization's strategy should be, because there are a whole range of different ways that you can influence customer behavior. And I think a lot of organizations get to know their customers, but don't necessarily think through or aren't that focused on what the one or two big things that they really want to achieve, either through deeper customer understanding or through building a loyalty program that actually really leverages or aims for what you're trying to achieve in a couple of specific areas.
And if you could ask one question to a brand or a customer or a competitor, what would it be? So pretend you have a crystal ball. What would you ask and who would you ask?
Well, there is so much buzz around machine learning and AI and the sophistication of data analytics. So my question to marketers would be to really understand what is the level of data sophistication in reality that they are applying to their marketing science. So which means what is the level of single customer view that they have really been able to create across the organization to understand their unique customers, their needs, preferences, and behavior. Does it then translate into a level of data analytics that is really solving business problems as well as creating true customer value? And finally, what is the level of data analytics that is being used to actually measure the efficacy of a loyalty program? So that will be the big question.
All right, and Tim, how about you? If you had a crystal ball, what would you ask and who would you ask?
Oh, at the moment, and this is particularly relevant for the UK, but also relevant for, I guess, any global countries that will deal with any form of customer data that is in any way European. So essentially, we've got the GDPR, Global Data Protection Regulation, coming in next year in May, and you can't really underestimate how big a change this will be. So definitely for the UK market, definitely for the European market, but I think it's broader than that, because I think there will be a lot of what's in there that will be replicated around the world, and companies are really just trying to understand what that actually means for them. And it's understandably ambiguous in the way that the laws are actually written. It's not an easy thing to understand, but generally speaking, companies are going to have to be far more accurate in the records that they hold on their customers, but also allow their customers far greater, I guess, opt-in to how you're actually using that data, whether it's for messaging, for analytics, all of that. You're going to have to be very explicit about what that actually means and communicate and ask permission from your customers. And that actually ends up being quite a positive thing, I think, for the organizations that are able to do that well. Firstly, because you're kind of forced to make sure that you've got the right, most accurate kind of information on your customers, and the more accurate your data is, the more you can actually do with it, the more analytics you can leverage, and the more you can apply that to a loyalty scheme. But also asking your customers permission, it's quite an active engagement with them. And for those customers that actively accept and want to be involved in your program, those customers are the ones who are likely to want that long-term engagement going forward. So it's got a real opportunity there.
And finally, Ivor, what do you think is the future of customer loyalty?
Oh, I think this is an interesting question. It's interesting because I guess the way it's framed, it wasn't what's the future of loyalty programs, it's what's the future of customer loyalty. And I think it's going to evolve quite a lot away from the traditional. I think there's still going to be a place for loyalty currency and points and what have you, and everything. But I guess the future of loyalty is going to be less about that potential view of kind of bribery from a customer product point of view, that you're not going to entice or keep people in a brand just because you're providing them that value through the currency. I think it's more about deeper understanding of customer through richer data insights. And I think that the thing about loyalty itself is back to the product and what that product does for the customer. And if that product actually serves and helps that customer with making their lives easier, enriching their lives, I think you're going to get that ingrained kind of loyalty to that brand and to the services, the products that the company provides.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for being here, and I want to thank everyone for being here. We appreciate all of your insights and the input from everyone from Aimia today.